Rain smashed against the windshield in chaotic, blinding sheets, so heavy it looked like the sky itself had cracked open. Wind rattled the frame of the old pickup truck. Streetlights flickered in long, watery smears. Tires hissed against the drenched asphalt. Stanley Reyes tightened both hands on the steering wheel. He'd driven through storms before, but something about this one felt different. Aggressive, unpredictable, alive. The wipers squealed across the glass, fighting a losing battle as water recovered everything in seconds. Thunder boomed in the distance, not a rumble, but a deep, shaking burst that vibrated through the truck's cabin. His phone buzzed, but he didn't dare look. Lightning flashed. Then, a silhouette, a car, skidding sideways. Before he could even register the danger, the vehicle 2 lanes over lost control, its tires slicing across the flooded road like a thrown blade. In a heartbeat, it fishtailed, spun, and violently cut into his lane. Stanley slammed the brakes. Metal screamed. Glass shook. Time shattered. The impact jolted him forward so hard, the seatbelt locked across his chest and shoulders. His vision blurred as the truck spun, one full rotation then another, until finally it lurched into a hard stop against the curb. The world went quiet, not peaceful, just muted, like someone had stuffed cotton into the night. Rain still hammered the truck. Wind still roared. But inside, all Stanley could hear was the thumping of his own heartbeat, loud and uneven, pulsing with shock. He exhaled shakily. Okay, He winced. His leg ached. His shoulder throbbed. His mind raced. Then he heard it. Someone shouting from outside. Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me? A woman's voice, urgent, steady, yet trembling just slightly at the edges. Stanley blinked through the fog on the cracked windshield. A figure ran toward him, dark hair plastered against her cheeks, jacket soaked, face lit by passing headlights. She reached his door and pulled on the handle with wet, cold fingers. Can you open it? She called. He pushed, and the door creaked open. The rain slammed into him instantly, icy and breath-stealing. The woman crouched down beside him, shielding her eyes from the downpour. Don't move too fast, she warned. You might be dizzy. He stared at her for a second. Because in the middle of all that chaos, in the wreckage, the wind, the fear, her eyes were calm, kind, alive. Who? Stanley swallowed. Who are you? I'm Adele, she said breathlessly. I saw it happen. I stopped. A crash of thunder illuminated them both, 2 strangers locked in the most bizarre, terrifying, life-changing moment either had experienced in years. She leaned back and shouted over the wind. Stay with me, okay? Don't pass out. He breathed out a weak laugh. I'm trying. Behind her, the other car door opened. A younger man, the student who'd hydroplaned, stumbled out, panic written across his face. Adele darted toward him, her voice steadying him instantly. Are you hurt? Can you move? Stay right here. Help is coming. The moment froze. Water running down Adele's face. Flashlights in the distance. The rainstorm swallowing sound and light. And 2 strangers unknowingly stepping into each other's lives. A narration overlays softly. What if the worst night of your life brings you the person who changes everything? Because this is not just a story about a crash. It's about connection, healing, unexpected beginnings, and about 2 ordinary people who had no idea that this moment, this violent, chaotic, terrifying moment, would become the spark that rewrote both their lives. Chapter 1. Parallel lives. Before the accident, before the collision, before fate forced 2 strangers into the same frame, Stanley Reyes and Adele Durant lived separate, quiet, almost invisible lives. Lives so ordinary that neither would have guessed how close they were to crossing paths. Stanley's world, routine, responsibility, and quiet grief. Nashville's early morning light filtered weakly through the blinds of Stanley's small apartment. The place was tidy in a lived-in way, coffee mugs drying by the sink, a stack of mechanic magazines on the coffee table, a folded blanket on the couch. His alarm went off at 6 a.m. sharp. Not because he wanted it to, but because responsibility didn't let him sleep in. He sat on the edge of the bed, stretching his back before standing. His apartment was still, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that becomes familiar after losing someone. His mother's photo sat on the dresser, smiling warmly, holding a sunflower. Stanley touched the frame lightly. "Good morning, Ma." It was habit, ritual, one of the few things that grounded him. He threw on jeans and a work shirt, grabbed his lunch, and headed out the door. His pickup truck groaned when he turned the ignition. "Come on," he muttered, tapping the dashboard. "Hold it together for one more week." On his commute, he made the same stop he made every morning, Joe's Corner Cafe, a tiny little place run by a middle-aged couple who recognized customers by their order. "Morning, Stanley," the barista chirped. "Hazelnut coffee, right?" "Yep. And a blueberry muffin if you still have one." "You're lucky," she said, handing him the bag. "Last one." He smiled. A small win. But even as he drove off, there was a heaviness to him, a loneliness he didn't talk about, a grief that lingered despite years passing. He wasn't depressed, but he wasn't exactly joyful either. Just surviving, just moving forward, just existing. To co-workers, he seemed dependable. To acquaintances, he seemed stable. But to himself, he was a man trying to rebuild without knowing what the blueprint was. Adele's world, compassion, chaos, and quiet burnout. 3 miles away, the world of Adele Durant was already buzzing. Her morning started with a knock on her loft door, the bakery owner downstairs delivering a stray package left for her again. "Morning, Adele, this one's yours." "Amazon strikes again." She laughed warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Hollis. I owe you cookies." She poured herself a cup of strong chamomile tea before heading to her non-profit office. Her days were packed with intake meetings, city paperwork, home placement referrals, emotional, counseling, and the constant balancing act of helping people without burning out. But burnout had been creeping closer. Her co-workers adored her, her empathy, her calm voice, her ability to de-escalate tense situations. But beneath that warmth was exhaustion she rarely acknowledged. She carried so much for so many people, sometimes too much. At lunchtime, she sent her friend Remy a quick text. "I feel like a social worker, therapist, life coach, and firefighter all at once." Remy responded, "You are all of those. Just remember you're human too." Adele smiled sadly. Human, tired, trying. That was her truth. Her heart was huge, but her shoulders were tired of carrying the world. Still, she loved her work. She believed in people. She believed in second chances. She just didn't realize she needed one too. Parallel lives, barely missing each other. Same stores, same commute routes, same coffee shop on Saturday mornings. 2 ordinary people living ordinary lives, without knowing how extraordinary their story was about to become. On one random Tuesday, just before the storm, they even passed each other unknowingly. Stanley walked into Joe's cafe as Adele walked out, both holding identical cups of hazelnut brew. Their shoulders brushed lightly. Adele apologized softly. Stanley nodded politely, and they moved on. No spark, no moment, no recognition of what was coming. If life had shifted by even 1 minute, maybe the story would have begun there. But it didn't. It waited. It waited for the rain. It waited for the storm. It waited for the shock, the collision, the night that would tear their worlds open just enough for someone new to slip inside. Chapter 2. The storm builds. The day the storm rolled in, Nashville felt unsettled from the moment the sun rose. Clouds hung low and heavy, like they were waiting for the perfect moment to snap open. The air felt thick, humid, restless. People commented on it at gas stations, in break rooms, at bus stops. "It's coming," someone said at Stanley's workplace. "You feel that?" "Storm's gonna be nasty," another added. Weather alerts pinged phones all morning. Radar maps flashed red and purple streaks across the region. Meteorologists warned about flash floods and dangerous road conditions. But life rarely slows down just because the sky threatens to break. People still had to work, still had to run errands, still had to make it home, and both Stanley and Adele had long days ahead of them. Stanley's day, pressure before the storm. At the shipping warehouse where he worked as a logistics coordinator, stress levels were already high. A last-minute reroute request from a client had caused a scramble. An entire truckload filled with medical supplies needed to go to a different state due to a disaster relief need. The paperwork hadn't been updated properly, and the wrong pallets were loaded. Stanley stepped in, as he always did, not because he was obligated, but because he couldn't stand watching people panic. He reviewed documents, checked tracking codes, and reorganized the shipment manually. His boss, Mr. Klein, a man with a thinning hairline and constant coffee breath, stopped beside him. "You're a lifesaver, Reyes," he muttered. Stanley shrugged. "Just doing what needs doing. You're always doing what needs doing. You ever think about taking a break?" "Breaks don't fix things," Stanley replied, scanning another barcode. Mr. Klein sighed. "You're too reliable for your own good." He meant it as a compliment, but to Stanley, it felt like pressure. Responsibility was a weight he had learned to carry early in life. Losing his mom had made it heavier. Every time he stepped up, it felt like he was proving, to himself, to the world, that he hadn't crumbled. Still, by late afternoon, he could feel the exhaustion settling into his bones. His sister, Tessa, texted him. "Tessa, storm's bad tonight. Can you stay off the roads?" "Stanley, I'll be careful. Long day." "Tessa, you always say that. Call me later." "Stanley, promise." He didn't promise lightly, but he also didn't expect how difficult it would be to keep it. Adele's day, compassion tested. Across town, Adele's non-profit center was packed. The rain hadn't even started, but the threat of it meant people experiencing homelessness were seeking shelter, warmth, or basic supplies before conditions worsened. Adele moved from room to room, speaking with clients, volunteers, and city outreach partners. She had a natural ability to offer comfort without sounding patronizing. Just a calm, warm presence people trusted instantly. But today, she was stretched thin. A woman named Carla, mid-40s, recently evicted, had arrived in tears after hearing her temporary housing request was delayed. Adele sat with her for almost an hour, holding her hand, listening as Carla explained the fear of having nowhere safe to sleep. "We'll figure something out," Adele promised. "You're not alone in this." When Carla left with a temporary shelter voucher, Adele leaned silently against her office wall and closed her eyes. She wasn't sure if she was more relieved or emotionally drained. Her co-worker, Nora, poked her head in. "You okay? You look wiped." Adele opened her eyes. "Just a lot today. You take on too much," Nora said gently. "You know that, right?" "I can handle it." "Sure. But who handles you?" Adele didn't answer. Because she didn't have one. Her family was distant. Her romantic past had ended quietly and painfully. Her job gave her purpose, but also emotional fatigue that seeped into her evenings. Still, she pushed through the afternoon. She worked intake forms, answered emails, filed emergency requests, and then Sandra, the non-profit director, pulled her aside. "Adele, we need to talk soon about funding." Adele froze. What kind of talk? The kind that starts with budget cuts and ends with, "We need to make decisions." A sinking feeling washed through her. The non-profit was her life's work. Losing it felt like losing a piece of herself. But the storm outside wasn't waiting for her feelings. The sky breaks open. At 5:30 p.m., just as Adele was locking up the office and Stanley was walking to the warehouse lot, the first crack of thunder split the air. Within minutes, rain poured in sheets, thick, angry, relentless. Pedestrians ran for cover. Drivers turned on their headlights early. Wind whipped signs and trees violently. Adele struggled with her umbrella as a gust nearly flipped it inside out again. Rain slapped her cheeks and soaked her jacket instantly. Stanley jogged to his truck, already frustrated by how soaked he'd become in 10 seconds. Both hesitated. Both wondered if they should wait. But both had responsibilities pulling them home. Adele needed sleep before a big community planning meeting the next day. Stanley had promised Tessa he'd call once he was safely back at his apartment. So they started their engines, turned their wipers to max, and drove straight into the heart of the storm. Neither knew they were less than 15 minutes from crossing paths, and from changing each other's lives forever. Chapter 3. The Collision. Water rushed down the streets so quickly that drains overflowed. Traffic slowed to a cautious crawl, hazard lights blinking on multiple vehicles. Stanley focused intensely on the road ahead, squinting through the downpour. "Just get home," he murmured to himself. He replayed the stressful day in his mind. Every mistake he'd fixed, every responsibility he shouldered. When the red light at Brookfield Avenue came into view, he eased the truck to a stop. His phone buzzed, a message from Tessa popping onto the screen. He ignored it. Safety first. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, humming softly along with the radio. Someone in another car was blasting country music loud enough to echo across the intersection. Stanley smirked. Only in Nashville. The light turned green. He pressed gently on the gas. Just as a sedan, 2 lanes over, hit a pocket of water, the vehicle jerked, spun, hydroplaned with a high, screeching slide that cut across the lanes like a blade. Stanley's heart dropped. He slammed the brakes with everything he had. The sedan smashed into the front of his truck. The impact whipped his head forward, then backward. The seat belt dug into his ribs. The world spun. His truck rotated, left, right, left again, until it slammed into the curb. Rain pounded the windows. His ears rang. His vision blurred. He blinked, trying to gather his surroundings. What just happened? Was he bleeding? Could he move? He flexed his fingers. Okay. His leg, sore, but moving. His chest, tight, but breathing. He wiped fog from the windshield and saw distorted headlights shining at odd angles. The sedan's driver door opened, and a young man stumbled out, drenched and shaking. Then another car door opened, not from the crash, but from behind. A woman stepped out. Dark curls stuck to her cheeks. Jacket plastered to her frame. Eyes wide with alarm and concern. Adele. She slapped on her hazard lights. She grabbed her phone. She sprinted into the rain. "Are you okay?" she shouted, her voice somehow cutting through the storm. Stanley pushed his truck door open. Pain shot through his knee, but he managed to stand. Yeah, I think. You?" he said. "I'm fine." She turned toward the student. Are you hurt?" He shook his head wildly. I didn't mean to. My tires, there was water." "It's okay," she said, grounding him instantly. "Breathe. Help is on the way." When she turned back toward Stanley, their eyes met. And for the first time, he noticed the sincerity in her expression. The fear, the relief, the warmth. A stranger in the rain, but somehow not a stranger. Lightning flashed. Thunder rolled. Rain blurred the world around them. But Stanley would later remember one specific moment with perfect clarity. The way Adele looked at him, not with pity, not with judgment, but with genuine concern. The kind you don't expect from someone who doesn't know your name. She stepped closer. "Can you walk? Do you feel dizzy?" "A little," he admitted. "Let's get you somewhere dry." He laughed weakly. "Is that possible tonight?" She smiled softly. "We can try." That smile, just that, pulled something inside him back to life. They moved to the overhang of a hardware store nearby. Adele guided Stanley carefully, checking on him every few steps. The student followed behind them, apologizing repeatedly. But for Stanley and Adele, the noise of the storm faded. Chapter 4. The Overhang. The storm showed no sign of relenting. Rain crashed sideways under the streetlights. Wind howled like a warning siren across the empty parking lot. The hardware store's metal overhang rattled every few seconds, as if threatening to tear loose. Adele, Stanley, and the college student huddled beneath it, 3 drenched silhouettes in the dim glow. The student paced back and forth, running shaky hands through his soaked hair. "I'm so sorry," he kept saying. "I couldn't see. The car just went on its own." "You hydroplaned," Adele said gently. "It happens fast. You're not a bad driver. You hit a bad patch of water." He paused, staring at her with wide, scared eyes. "Do you think my insurance—" "We'll handle all of that," she said, reassuring but honest. "Right now, just breathe." Stanley watched her, watched the way she spoke calmly, even though her voice trembled faintly from the cold. Watched how she guided the student's breathing, her tone softening, her shoulders steadying. He was surprised by how comforting her presence felt. She turned to him. "Are you sure you're not hurt worse? You're limping." "I'm okay," he insisted. "My knee just feels tight or shocked, something like that." "Sit," she urged. He did. He lowered himself onto the metal bench attached to the wall. Adele crouched beside him, eyeing his leg with concern. "Can you bend it? A little. How's your head? Any dizziness? Blurred vision?" Stanley blinked. "Are you a nurse or something?" Adele laughed softly. "No, but I've worked in community outreach long enough to know basic first aid checks." There was something in her laugh, warm but slightly guarded, that made him curious about her. Curious in a way he hadn't felt about anyone in a very long time. She sat beside him, hugging her arms around herself to preserve whatever body heat she had left. "You must be freezing," he said. She nodded. "Storm caught me off guard, and yet you still ran toward the crash." Adele paused, face softening. "I couldn't just drive by." The honesty in her voice made his chest tighten, not painfully but unexpectedly. The student checked his phone, sighing with relief. "My roommate's on the way. He's got a Jeep. Says he can get through the water." "Good," Adele said. "You shouldn't drive that car in this weather again." He nodded and stepped away to make another call, which left Adele and Stanley alone on the bench. Rain pounded the pavement in a relentless rhythm. Thunder rolled overhead. The parking lot shimmered under the storm, puddles spreading wider with every passing minute. Adele sat with her shoulders slightly hunched, trying to steady her breathing after the adrenaline spike. She tucked a wet curl behind her ear. Stanley found himself staring longer than he meant to. "You okay?" she asked, catching him. He cleared his throat. "Yeah, just trying to process everything." She nodded slowly. "It's a lot. Crashes don't just shake your car, they shake your mind for a while too." He exhaled. "Feels weird, like my brain hasn't caught up." "That's normal." He glanced at her again. "You talk like you've done this before." Adele shifted lightly. "I've helped people through emergencies, different circumstances, but people usually need a calm voice in moments like this." He smiled gently. "Lucky for us you were here." She held his gaze for a second longer than necessary. "I'm glad you're okay, Stanley." The way she said his name, soft, certain, sincere, sent a small spark through him. He didn't know why, didn't try to explain it. The feeling was new, warm, and not unwelcome. They sat quietly for a moment. Not awkward silence, just calm. Two strangers occasionally meeting each other's eyes in the middle of a storm. Eventually, the student's roommate arrived, headlights cutting through the rain. The young man ran to the Jeep, shouting a thanks over his shoulder, and then it was just Adele and Stanley under the overhang. "What now?" Stanley asked. "Well," Adele glanced toward Stanley's totaled truck. "Your vehicle definitely isn't drivable." He chuckled. "That's putting it nicely. I can drive you home," she offered. "If you want." Stanley hesitated. Not because he doubted her intentions, she radiated sincerity, but because it felt strange to accept help so willingly. He was used to handling things on his own, used to being the reliable one, not the one needing assistance. "You sure?" he asked. Adele nodded firmly. "It's no trouble, and I'd feel better knowing you got home safe." Something in her tone, gentle but confident, pushed him past his hesitation. "Okay," he said softly. "Thank you." "Come on," she said, standing. "Let's get out of this rain." And together they stepped out from under the overhang. Two people who had no idea that this strange, chaotic night was the beginning of something beautiful. Chapter 5. The Ride Home. The warmth inside Adele's car felt like a blessing. Stanley sank into the passenger seat, wincing slightly as his knee adjusted. Adele climbed into the driver's side, her soaked jacket dripping onto the floor. She cranked up the heater. Warm air rushed through the vents, filling the space with a low hum. That made the storm outside feel distant, even if only for a moment. "You can adjust the seat if you need," Adele offered. Stanley nodded and shifted slightly. "Thanks." For a moment, they sat in silence, catching their breath, grounding themselves, letting the shock settle. Then, Adele spoke softly. "Storm's only supposed to get worse. We should probably take the slow streets." "Good call." She eased onto the road, driving far below the speed limit, wipers fighting the rain in a losing battle. Stanley watched her hands on the wheel, steady, careful, thoughtful. She drove like someone who had been responsible her entire life. He admired that. "Do you always stop at accidents?" he asked. "Not always. But I couldn't have lived with myself if I didn't check on you guys." Her honesty carried no pride, just sincerity. "What about you?" she asked. "You seem calm for someone who just got hit." "I'll panic later when I'm alone," he joked. Adele laughed, really laughed, her shoulders shaking lightly. "That's fair." A comfortable silence followed. Then Adele glanced toward him. "What do you do for work?" "Logistics coordinator at a shipping warehouse." "Is it stressful?" "Most days?" "No." "Today?" "Absolutely." She smiled. "Long day before the crash?" He nodded. "Long week. What happened?" Stanley rubbed the back of his neck. "People rely on me a lot. Sometimes it feels like too much." Adele exhaled softly. "I understand that more than you know. You work in outreach, right?" She blinked, surprised. "How did you—" "You mentioned first aid, and you were incredibly calm." Adele laughed. "Yeah, that tracks. I'm a community outreach coordinator, mostly housing support." "That sounds heavy." "It is," she admitted, "but it's meaningful, and that helps a lot." Her voice quieted. "But some days I wonder how much longer I can keep giving all of myself before something gives out." Stanley turned toward her. She wasn't just talking about the job. He could hear it, feel it, beneath her words. "You ever think about taking a break?" Adele smiled sadly. "Breaks don't fix the world." He stared at her, genuinely struck. "That's exactly what I said to my boss today," he said softly. She looked at him, surprise flickering in her eyes, followed by something gentler. "Maybe we're both too responsible," she said, "or too scared to let anyone else help." They shared a long look, one that made Stanley's chest warm and made Adele's breath catch slightly. But neither said anything more. The storm roared outside, but inside the car, it felt strangely peaceful, light-hearted moments to break tension. As they approached a red light, Adele groaned softly. "Ugh, I hate this intersection. Always floods. You want me to get out and push the water back?" Stanley teased. She snorted. "Please do. Maybe the storm will respect you." "Storms never respect me," he replied. "Coffee machines don't respect me either." Adele laughed again, an easy melodic sound that filled the car like warmth. "What happened with your coffee machine?" "It makes this horrible sputtering noise every morning, like it's reconsidering whether I deserve caffeine." "That's relatable." "It sounds like a dying blender." "That's less relatable." And they both laughed. Laughed the kind of laugh that only comes when fear melts into relief. Approaching Stanley's place. When they reached his apartment building, Adele parked by the curb. Stanley hesitated before unbuckling. "I honestly don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to," she replied softly. "No, really. You stopped. You helped. You didn't have to do any of that." Adele met his eyes. "I'm glad I did." Another silence, this one filled with something warm, unspoken. "You should text someone," she said gently. "Tell them you're home safe." "I promised my sister." "I will." He opened the door but didn't step out yet. Can I? He stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Adele waited patiently. Can I call you tomorrow to check in? On insurance stuff, I mean, and, everything. Her lips curved into a small smile. I'd like that. She handed him her phone. He typed his number in with a shaky hand and returned it. Good night, Stanley. Good night, Adele. He stepped out. The rain soaked him instantly, but he barely felt it. Because for the first time in a long time, something in his life felt hopeful. Adele watched him walk inside, heart unexpectedly full. She didn't know where this was going, didn't know why she felt drawn to him so quickly, didn't know how one night could shift something inside her, but she felt it, and maybe he felt it too. Chapter 6. The Call That Changes Everything. Stanley woke the next morning feeling like he'd run a marathon in his sleep. His knee ached. His shoulder throbbed. His jaw felt tight from clenching during the crash. He lay in bed for a few seconds, blinking at the ceiling, replaying the events in broken fragments. The skid, the impact, Adele's voice calling out, her hand on his arm, her laugh in the car. He sat up slowly, wincing, and grabbed his phone from the nightstand. 2 texts from Tessa awaited him. Tessa, did you get home safe? You didn't call. Tessa, call me a sap. He dialed her immediately. Stan, oh my gosh, you scared me half to death. I'm okay, he reassured. Just saw. What happened? He explained everything, briefly leaving out Adele, not because he wanted to hide her, but because he wasn't sure how to explain her yet. And, you're really okay? She asked for the 10th time. Yeah. Really? You need to go to urgent care. Tessa, no arguing. I'm your sister. That knee could be worse than you think. He sighed. Fine. I'll go later. Promise. I promise. She finally hung up, satisfied. Stanley tossed the phone onto the bed, rubbing his face. He replayed the moment Adele dropped him off, her soft smile through the windshield, the glow of the dashboard lights on her face. He felt grounded, centered, seen, not romantically, not yet, just connected in a way that surprised him. After showering and dressing, he sat on the couch with an ice pack on his knee. His truck would stay at the repair shop for days, maybe longer. His boss had already texted him that morning. Mr. Klein, take the day off. Don't come in limping. Insurance can wait. Stanley smiled faintly. It wasn't often his boss showed softness. He hesitated a long moment before pulling up Adele's number. Is this weird? Should I wait? She might be busy. But something in him, something quiet but certain, pushed him to call. The phone rang twice. Hello? Adele's voice. Warm, soft, a little groggy. Stanley smiled without realizing it. Hey, it's Stanley. There was a brief pause, but not a surprised one. More like she'd been expecting the possibility. Hi, Stanley, she said, and he could hear her smile. How are you feeling? Sore, he admitted, but okay. And I wanted to thank you again. You don't have to keep thanking me. Let me, at least today. She laughed softly. All right, today only. He exhaled, relieved she wasn't brushing him off. I wanted to check on your car, he said. Did everything turn out okay? Just a scratched bumper. Nothing serious. That's good. And your truck? Not so lucky. It's at a shop now. Ouch. Yeah. Another silence. But again, the good kind. The kind filled with unspoken curiosity. Stanley, she said gently. Yeah? Did you call for another reason? He swallowed. Caught. Yeah, he confessed. I was hoping maybe we could meet for coffee. No pressure. Just talk. A longer pause this time. Then, I'd like that, she whispered. Relief washed through him so strongly he had to sit back on the couch. How's this afternoon? She asked. That works. Great. There's a cafe near my place. I'll text you the address. I'll be there. Good. Good, he echoed. And they hung up, with both of them staring at their screens for long seconds afterward. hearts beating in unsteady rhythms, neither one fully understood yet. The first coffee, small moments, big impact. The cafe Adele chose was quaint and warm, full of mismatched wooden chairs and old vinyl records displayed on the walls. The kind of place where conversations felt easier, softer. Stanley arrived early, nervous early, heart in throat early. He picked a seat by the window and tried not to stare at the door every 3 seconds. When Adele walked in, time slowed just slightly, not in a dramatic, cinematic way, but in a real way, a human way. Her hair, still a little damp from the misting rain outside, framed her face softly. She wore a simple forest green sweater and jeans, nothing glamorous. But she didn't need anything glamorous. She spotted him instantly and offered a small smile. "Hey," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hey," he echoed, feeling oddly breathless. "You came early. Or you came late." She laughed. "Touché." They ordered drinks, hazelnut coffee for him, spiced chai for her, and the conversation flowed in an unexpected rhythm. Easy, gentle, curiously familiar. Adele talked about her work, the challenges, the joy, the exhaustion. Stanley talked about logistics, his mother, and how responsibility shaped him. They shared childhood stories. They shared small insecurities. They shared small glances, unplanned, lingering, warm. When Adele described her umbrella flipping inside out again that morning, Stanley laughed so hard he had to cover his eyes. "That thing has a personal vendetta against you," he said. "It does," she agreed. "And it's winning." At one point, Stanley mispronounced the name of her tea, masala chahi, and Adele laughed so hard she nearly spilled it. "You added extra syllables," she teased. I panicked. People turned to look at them, but not in annoyance, in curiosity, because two strangers breaking into bright, genuine laughter in a stormy cafe is rare, beautiful, worth glancing at. After an hour, neither wanted the moment to end. So they stepped outside together. The rain had softened to a light drizzle. The world felt cleaner somehow. They walked to a nearby park, moving slowly, letting the quiet spaces between conversations fill with possibility. Their hands brushed lightly. Neither pulled away. "Feels weird," Stanley admitted softly. "Like I've known you longer than a day." Adele looked at him, cheeks slightly warmed by the cold air. "I feel that too," she whispered. And with that simple confession, something shifted. The kind of shift people spend years chasing. The kind that doesn't happen with everyone. The kind that means something. They didn't define it. They didn't label it. They didn't rush it. They simply walked, side by side, letting the evening air fold around them gently. Two people who had no idea how deeply their worlds were already beginning to intertwine. Chapter 7, growing closer. Days passed. Then a week. Then another. And slowly, carefully, beautifully, Stanley and Adele began weaving each other into their routines. Not by force, not by expectation, just by showing up, by choosing to be present, by choosing connection. Their second accidental date happened when Adele texted, "Adele, found a place with the best sweet potato fries in town. Want to try it?" Stanley, do sweet potato fries count as a reason to leave the house? Adele, always. They met at a cozy diner with yellow booths and framed photos of Nashville hanging on the walls. The moment their plates arrived, Adele's eyes lit up. "These are life-changing," she said. Stanley took a bite and nodded appreciatively. "I'm changed. You're mocking me." A little. This time, they did sit closer. Close enough that Stanley noticed the faint lavender scent of her hair. Close enough that Adele felt the calm warmth of him beside her. At one point, she touched her hair absent-mindedly, brushing a curl back behind her ear. Stanley watched her, a softness in his eyes he didn't hide fast enough. She caught him. "What?" she asked gently. He hesitated. "Nothing. Just, you seem happier tonight." Adele looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I am," she said softly. And the weight of that admission settled between them like an anchor, steady, grounding, sincere. A few days later, Stanley's knee was still aching, so Adele offered to bring a movie to his place. "I can pick something light," she said, "or something terrible. Terrible movies are fun in their own way. Surprise me." She chose a movie that was supposed to be romantic but was mostly absurd. They sat on the floor, sharing takeout and sarcastic commentary. "That guy's haircut should be illegal," Adele whispered. Stanley chuckled. "It's a crime scene." At some point, their shoulders touched, then rested there naturally, comfortably, warmly. Stanley didn't move. Adele didn't move. Connection blossomed quietly, not rushed, not forced, just felt. One Saturday, Adele invited Stanley to help her distribute donated clothing at a community event. "You don't have to," she said. "I want to," he replied. And he did. He helped lift boxes, greet families, and carry bags for elderly attendees. He watched Adele move through the crowd, gentle, patient, kind. And she watched him too, especially when he helped a young father find jackets for his kids, kneeling down to make eye contact with the oldest child. "You're good with people," she told him afterward. He shook his head. "No, you're good with people. I'm just assisting." Adele smiled softly. "I think you underestimate yourself." He looked at her, really looked, and something in his chest tightened in a way that felt new and familiar all at once. They didn't talk about their feelings yet, not directly, but both of them felt them brewing. For Stanley, do I deserve this? Am I moving too fast? What if I'm not enough? For Adele, can I trust? What if I'm disappointed again? What if I lose something I didn't know I needed? Emotion isn't linear. Connection isn't clean. And two people carrying their own wounds can't simply erase them overnight. But what they could do, what they were doing, was showing up, learning each other, choosing warmth over fear. One evening, after eating takeout on Adele's living room floor again, she reached up absent-mindedly to tuck a curl behind her ear. Stanley watched her. She felt his gaze and looked up slowly. "What?" she asked softly. "I'm just glad you were there that night." Adele's heart tightened. "Me too." Silence filled the room. Not empty, but charged. Not tense, but tender. Stanley shifted slightly closer, not touching her, not assuming. "Can I?" he whispered. Adele nodded. He leaned in slowly, gently, giving her every chance to pull away. Their lips met softly, warm, tender, steady. No rush, no intensity beyond what felt natural. Just a quiet, emotional connection deepening in the simplest possible way. When they pulled back, their foreheads rested together lightly. "That felt right," she whispered. "It did," he murmured. And the moment wasn't fireworks. It was warmth, safety, trust beginning to take shape. Chapter 8. Real-world problems. For a while, things felt easy. Easier than either Stanley or Adele expected. Dinner nights, volunteer days, slow walks through the park, and long conversations that filled quiet evenings with warmth. Their growing connection felt soft, deliberate, strengthening bit by bit. But real life has a way of testing anything fragile, anything new, and slowly the world around them tightened its grip. Adele arrived at the non-profit office early one Monday morning, coffee in hand, hope in her chest. But as soon as she stepped inside, she sensed something off. Her director, Sandra, sat at her desk with a stack of financial reports in front of her, rubbing her forehead with both hands. "Morning," Adele said tentatively. Sandra exhaled deeply. "Can you close the door for a minute?" Adele froze. Closed doors only meant one of two things in non-profits. Someone was in trouble, or funding was. She stepped inside and shut the door quietly. "What's going on?" Sandra looked up with tired eyes. "It's the budget." Adele felt her stomach twist. "How bad?" "Worse than we expected. 2 grants didn't renew. Donations dropped after last quarter. City funding is delayed again." She slid a document across her desk. "We're operating in the negative." Adele's breath caught. "We might have to cut programs," Sandra continued. "And Possibly staff hours. Adele stared at the table. Her job, her clients, her purpose, all suddenly fragile. But we can't cut programs, Adele whispered. People rely on them, especially the emergency vouchers. I know, Sandra said gently. But numbers don't care about compassion. Adele swallowed hard, fighting the urge to crumble. I'm sorry to drop this on you, Sandra added. But you deserve to know. We'll reassess in 30 days. 30 days. 30 days until everything she'd built could vanish. She walked out of the office in a fog, the sounds of ringing phones and hushed client conversations fading into a distant hum. Her co-worker Nora intercepted her. Hey, are you okay? You look pale. Adele shook her head, unable to speak. Nora put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Hey, whatever it is, you're not alone. You hear me? Adele nodded, but the truth was much heavier. She did feel alone. And for the first time in months, she felt fear creeping into her chest. Fear of losing the one thing in her life that made her feel meaningful. Meanwhile, at the shipping warehouse, chaos simmered near a boil. With the rush season approaching, employees were scrambling to keep up. Reyes, the client's on the phone again. They want the shipment rerouted today. Stan, I need you to sign off on this inventory error. Hey man, the new hires don't understand the scanner system. Can you train them? Stanley moved from one problem to the next, offering help, directions, solutions. His knee still bothered him, but he masked it with a steady gait and forced calm. He never said no, never complained, never stepped back. But today, the pressure mounted fast. Mr. Klein caught up to him near the loading bay. You're doing the work of 3 people, he said quietly. I appreciate it, but you're burning yourself out. Stanley rubbed his temples. I'm fine. You're not, Klein insisted. Take tomorrow off. Doctor's orders, my doctor's orders. Stanley almost smiled, but he was too tired for humor. I'll think about it. You'll do more than think, Klein said, or I'll put you on leave myself. Stanley walked away, frustration tightening his shoulders. Everyone needed something from him. Everyone counted on him. Everyone relied on him to handle it. Except Adele. She didn't expect anything, didn't demand anything, didn't put weight on him. She was the one part of his life that didn't drain him. But even that, he worried, might change if she knew how overwhelmed he felt. They planned to meet that evening at Adele's place for dinner. Adele arrived home early, emotionally drained, needing comfort she didn't want to ask for. She wanted to see Stanley's calm smile, hear his steady voice. But when he arrived, something felt different. He walked slowly, his knee more swollen than usual, his face drawn with tiredness. Long day? She asked softly. You could say that, he replied, lowering himself onto her couch. Silence stretched between them. Not hostile, just heavy. Adele joined him. Something happened at work. He blinked. How did you? I can see it in your eyes. He sighed. Yeah. Everything piled up today. She nodded, then hesitated. I had a rough day too. Stanley looked at her gently. What happened? She swallowed. I think the non-profit might lose funding. A lot of it. We might lose programs, staff hours, maybe even jobs. He blinked. Adele, I'm so sorry. His voice carried genuine sympathy, but his expression carried exhaustion. Adele felt guilt tighten in her chest. I shouldn't dump that on you, she whispered. No, it's okay, he said quickly. But it didn't quite sound okay, and that small shift, barely noticeable, landed between them. Both hurting, both overwhelmed, both too tired to fully support the other. Adele placed a hand on his arm. Maybe we both need a quiet night. He nodded, grateful. They ate dinner together, watched a show in silence, and exchanged soft goodbyes. But as Stanley walked out, Adele felt a tiny crack in her chest, like something delicate was shifting. And Stanley, limping toward his rideshare car, felt something similar, a fear he couldn't name yet. Later that night, Adele's ex, Lucas, texted her, not romantically, not inappropriately, just unexpectedly. Lucas saw the non-profit news online. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around. It was harmless, kind even, but it stirred something in Adele's stomach, not because she still had feelings, she didn't, but because she didn't want anyone but Stanley to be her comfort. And yet, she hadn't been able to lean on Stanley tonight. She closed the message without replying. But the unease lingered. Chapter 9. A turning point. The next week tested them more than either anticipated. Adele buried herself in work, fighting for her non-profit survival. Stanley pushed through pain and fatigue, determined not to show weakness. They still saw each other, but their moments felt shorter, thinner, quieter, and sometimes misunderstood. It started on a Thursday evening when Adele invited Stanley to join her at a fundraiser meeting for the non-profit. She wasn't asking him to volunteer, she just wanted support, his presence. But Stanley hesitated. I can't tonight. I still have work emails, reports, my knees acting up. Adele nodded, but her eyes dimmed just slightly. Oh, okay. I understand. He sensed her disappointment. It's not that I don't want to go. You don't have to explain, she said quickly. But she didn't mean that. Not entirely. And Stanley felt it. So he pulled back too. Maybe we should take a quiet night, he suggested. Adele's silence said everything. He tried again. Adele, it's fine, Stanley. Really. She pulled away to tidy the table, even though nothing needed tidying. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't voice. Was she asking for too much? Was he pulling away? Was this what happened before? Stanley watched her, his chest tightening. She walked back to him slowly. I'm sorry. I think I'm just overwhelmed. I get it. I am too. Their eyes met, soft but unsure. This isn't us arguing, she whispered. I know. We're just tired. They moved closer and rested their foreheads together. It wasn't a fight, but it was a fracture. A small one, but real. Later that weekend, Adele planned the community outreach speech she would deliver, one meant to uplift donors and give hope. She felt anxious, uncertain, afraid of failing. Stanley showed up unannounced at her door, holding a bag of chocolate croissants. For stress, he said simply. She laughed, relieved. You remembered I liked these. You told me the second time we met. Just like that, tension dissolved between them. They sat together at her dining table as she practiced her speech. Stanley listened, offering gentle suggestions, admiring her passion. At one point, she stopped mid-sentence and smiled at him. What? He asked. You're really here for me, aren't you? He nodded softly. Always. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with something warmer. I needed that, she whispered. I know, he said, and for the first time in days, they felt aligned again. The morning of the speech, Stanley texted Adele. Stanley, you'll do amazing. Can't wait to see you up there. Adele responded immediately. Adele, thank you. That means so much. Minutes later, she tried to call him for a last-minute pep talk. No answer. She called again. No answer. Panic flickered. Not about him, but about herself. Maybe he's not coming. Maybe last night was just temporary. She tried to push those thoughts away. But insecurity has a way of creeping in through the smallest cracks. Chapter 10. The Community Event. The night of the city's Community Appreciation event felt like a crossroads. For Adele, it was a chance to show donors why the non-profit mattered and why it needed saving. For Stanley, it was a chance to support the woman who had quietly become the brightest part of his life. But earlier in the afternoon, their wires had crossed, and Adele, standing backstage with her speech in hand, wasn't sure if Stanley would show. The event hall buzzed with chatter. Soft lights illuminated round tables scattered across the room. Volunteers arranged pamphlets. City officials mingled near the refreshments. Everything looked polished, intentional, professional. But Adele felt anything but calm. She stood near the podium, rehearsing her opening lines under her breath. Her heart pounded, not from fear of public speaking, but from fear of disappointing herself and others. Sandra approached, offering a reassuring smile. "You ready?" Trying to be, "You've got this," Sandra said. "Speak from your heart." Adele nodded, but the knot in her stomach only tightened. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down, and her heart almost stopped. "Stanley, sorry I missed your calls earlier. I'm heading there now. Traffic's rough, but I'm coming. Promise." Adele exhaled a deep, shaky breath. He was coming. He still cared. Some of the weight lifted from her shoulders, not all, but enough. Stanley felt terrible for missing Adele's earlier calls. His knee had flared up badly that morning, so badly he needed to ice it and lie down. When he finally woke from an unplanned nap, his phone had multiple missed calls and messages. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his things, and rushed out the door. Traffic was brutal. The storm the night before had knocked out several traffic lights, causing long backups. He tapped the steering wheel anxiously as minutes ticked by. "Come on. Come on," he muttered. Adele needed him. He knew she did, and he wasn't about to let her down. Not again, not tonight. He parked several blocks away and jogged, limping, toward the event hall, pushing through the ache in his leg. He didn't care. The pain didn't matter compared to showing up for her. When he reached the building, he paused at the entrance to catch his breath. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, his hair wind-tousled, but he didn't care. He was here. He walked inside and scanned the room. And there she was. Adele stood near the stage, flipping through her notes nervously. She hadn't seen him yet. Her shoulders were tense, her lips pressed tightly together, her expression focused but strained. Stanley felt something inside him soften deeply. He made his way through the crowd. When she finally looked up, their eyes met. Relief washed across her face, subtle but unmistakable. "You made it," she whispered. "I told you I would." Her eyes glimmered, not with tears, but with gratitude so strong it nearly broke him. "You okay?" he asked gently. "Ask me after the speech," she managed. He smiled. "You'll be incredible." She shook her head lightly. "I'm terrified." "That's how you know it matters." Adele took a slow, steadying breath. "You ready?" he asked. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." "That's courage," he whispered. And in that simple exchange, their connection grew deeper, more anchored, more certain. When Sandra introduced her, Adele stepped onto the stage with trembling hands. The bright lights made her blink rapidly, and for a moment her mind went blank. She looked at the audience. City staff, donors, volunteers, strangers. Then she looked at Stanley. He stood near the back, watching her with a steady, encouraging gaze. He didn't smile widely or wave. He didn't mouth words. He simply nodded once. "I'm here." And that was enough. Adele turned back to the podium and began speaking. Not with perfection, not with polished rhetoric, but with authenticity. She talked about the woman who cried in her office because she couldn't find housing, about the single father struggling to feed his kids, about volunteers who showed up rain or shine because compassion mattered more than convenience, about Nashville's resilient, often invisible people. She spoke of hope, of community, of dignity. Her voice quivered at times, but she never lost it. She let her vulnerability shine, something she had never done in front of a crowd before. And finally, she said, taking a breath, "I want to remind us all that sometimes the smallest act of kindness, a conversation, a meal, even stopping during a storm, can change someone's life in ways we never expect." Stanley felt his heart clench. She was talking about him, about the night they met, about the moment that changed both of them. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Sandra squeezed her arm. Nora hugged her tightly. Donors nodded approvingly. But Adele looked only at one person, Stanley. He lifted his hand slightly, just enough for her to see. And she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave strangers. Not the professional one she used at work. A real one. Warm. Soft. Full of something unspoken. Later, after shaking hands and answering questions, Adele found Stanley waiting near the exit. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, you were right," she said with a shaky laugh. "I didn't pass out. I knew you wouldn't." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Thank you for being here. I wouldn't miss something important to you." A long, warm silence. Then they stepped outside together into the cool evening. The storm clouds had parted, leaving the sky washed clean. The distant hum of traffic filled the quiet spaces between them. The streetlights cast a soft glow over the empty sidewalk. Adele moved a little closer. Tonight felt big. "It was big," Stanley replied. "You were incredible." She looked up at him, not as a friend, not as someone grateful, but as someone who finally realized the depth of what she felt. "Stanley," she whispered, "that night we met, I keep thinking how easily things could have gone differently." "Me too. But instead," she continued, "it brought me to you." He swallowed gently, his voice low. "It brought me to you too." She stepped closer, just enough for their hands to brush. And Stanley, careful and respectful, gently intertwined his fingers with hers. Their hands fit together easily, naturally, as if they had done it 100 times. Adele leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, just real. Two people who let themselves feel something true. Chapter 11, Healing and Commitment. The days following the community event felt like a soft exhale. Not because life suddenly became perfect, but because Stanley and Adele had finally settled into a deeper understanding of each other. The next step in their connection wasn't a grand gesture. It was healing. For both of them. One quiet Saturday morning, Stanley picked up his phone and texted Adele. "Stanley, are you free this morning? There's something I want to do. I'd like you with me." Adele hesitated, just for a second. Not out of reluctance, but out of curiosity. "Adele, I'm free. Tell me where to meet you." He sent an address outside the city, a peaceful cemetery on a small hill. Adele's heart softened. She knew this was important. When she arrived, Stanley was standing near a small headstone, sunflowers placed at its base. His mother's name was etched in simple letters. Adele approached quietly, giving him space but letting him know she was there. "She would have liked you," Stanley said softly. Adele's breath caught. "You think so?" "I know so." He explained how his mother loved helping people, how she never let storms, literal or emotional, stop her from doing what mattered. Adele listened, touched by the tenderness in his voice. At one point, he looked at her and confessed, "I haven't brought anyone here since she passed." Adele swallowed gently. "Thank you for trusting me." Their hands found each other again, naturally, not for comfort alone, but for closeness, for connection, for something slowly becoming love. The next evening, Adele invited Stanley to her loft. She made tea, strong and warm, and set it between them on the couch. She looked nervous, fiddling with the mug handle. "There's something I haven't told you," she began softly. Stanley turned toward her. "You can tell me anything." She inhaled deeply. "I'm scared, not just about my job, about us." He tensed slightly, not in fear but in concern. She continued, voice trembling. "Every time something good enters my life, I get scared that it'll leave, that I'll lose it, that I'll mess it up. I've lost people before, people I trusted, and I guess I started believing good things weren't meant to last." Stanley gently reached for her hand. "You're not alone in that," he whispered. "I felt that too." Adele's eyes filled, not with tears, but with relief. "Really?" "Really," he said. "And I don't want to rush us. I don't need a perfect future planned. I just want to be present with you, one day at a time." She squeezed his hand gently. "Stanley, that means more than you know." He smiled softly. "You mean more than you know." A warmth grew between them, not electrifying, not overwhelming, but steady, grounded, peaceful, like a connection building a foundation. Later that night, after hours of soft conversation, Adele leaned her head on Stanley's shoulder. He rested his cheek lightly against her hair. After a long moment, she whispered, "I'm glad our worlds collided." Stanley closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of those words. So am I. They didn't rush into labels, didn't force promises, didn't romanticize the struggles they still faced. But something shifted that night. Something real. They weren't just two people healing in parallel anymore. They were beginning to heal together. Chapter 12. A Gentle New Beginning. The weeks following Stanley's visit to his mother's resting place felt different. Not louder, not dramatic, just steadier. Stanley and Adele weren't rushing into declarations or planning lifelong commitments. They were simply learning each other, choosing each other, and showing up consistently in small, meaningful ways. And real love, the kind that grows, is built exactly that way. They fell into a quiet rhythm that felt natural, like two puzzle pieces finally fitting together after years in separate boxes. On Wednesday mornings, Stanley would bring Adele a hazelnut latte before work. On Friday evenings, Adele would cook something simple, and they'd watch a show while sharing the couch blanket. Saturdays, they sometimes volunteered together, offering warmth to people who needed it most, a reminder of where Adele found her purpose and where Stanley unexpectedly found more of his. These weren't extravagant gestures. They weren't cinematic moments, but they were real, and that made them powerful. 2 weeks after the community event, Sandra gathered the non-profit team. "Good news," she announced, almost out of breath. "We secured partial emergency funding. It's not everything we need, but it buys us time." A collective sigh of relief swept through the office. Adele covered her mouth, eyes watering with gratitude. "Adele," Sandra said, touching her arm, "your speech made the difference. Donors reached out because of you." Adele's breath hitched. Her work still wasn't fully safe, but it wasn't lost. Not yet. She immediately texted Stanley. "Adele, we got partial funding. I think we're going to make it." "Stanley, I'm so proud of you. Tonight, we celebrate." Adele smiled down at her phone. Celebrate, not alone, not silently, not holding her breath, wondering who she could share good news with. With him. She typed back, "Adele, tonight." When Adele arrived at Stanley's apartment that night, she was greeted not by balloons or decorations, but by something simpler and far more meaningful. The lights were dimmed. Soft music played in the background. And on the dining table, Stanley had placed a small glass jar filled with tiny strips of paper. She blinked. "What's this?" Stanley rubbed the back of his neck. "I call it the good things jar. Something my mom used to do." Adele stepped closer. "Every time something good happens," he explained, "no matter how small, you write it down and put it in the jar. At the end of the year you read them all, and remember that even during the hardest months, good things happen too." Adele's throat tightened. "And this," Stanley added quietly, tapping the jar, "is the first good thing of the year." He held up a slip of paper. "Adele's non-profit secured partial funding. The city is keeping hope alive." Her eyes glossed with warmth. "You did this for me." "For us," he corrected gently. Adele stepped closer until she could feel the warmth of his presence. "This is the most thoughtful thing anyone's done for me." Stanley's voice softened. "You deserve good things, Adele. Even when you don't expect them." Her breath caught, and without thinking, without planning or overanalyzing, she wrapped her arms around him. He froze only for a moment, then held her with the same gentle certainty he had shown from the first night they met. They stood like that for a long time, both of them sinking into a quiet sense of emotional safety neither had experienced in years. Later, over a simple meal of pasta and roasted vegetables, Adele found herself watching Stanley. As he talked, the curve of his smile, the steadiness in his tone, the warmth in his laugh. She didn't interrupt. She didn't comment. She just watched, amazed by how naturally he fit into her world. He caught her staring. "What?" She hesitated, then laughed quietly. "Nothing. Just thinking how grateful I am that you're in my life." His expression softened into something gentle and full. "I'm grateful for you too." A quiet, luminous warmth filled the space between them. "And Stanley," Adele said softly. "Yeah? I'm not scared anymore, not like I was." He reached across the table and took her hand with slow, deliberate tenderness. "You don't have to be," he whispered. "We're going at our own pace. We're figuring it out together." She squeezed his fingers lightly. And for the first time since her past heartbreak, for the first time since Stanley lost his mother, for the first time since their lives collided on a rain-soaked street, they both felt it. Hope. Steady, grounded, growing hope. A few days later, Stanley knocked on Adele's door with something wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it," he said, visibly nervous. Adele removed the wrapping and gasped softly. Inside was a simple wooden frame Stanley had built himself, slightly imperfect, beautifully, handcrafted, holding a photo of the park where they had taken their first real walk. "You made this?" she whispered. He nodded. "Thought you'd like something to remind you that even after storms, there can be something beautiful waiting." Adele touched the frame gently, tears gathering but not falling. "This is perfect," she whispered. And in that moment, the final walls she'd been holding on to, walls built from past disappointments and fears, quietly fell away. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly. Not a tentative hug, not a careful one, a real one, grounded, sincere, and full of unspoken feeling. Stanley held her just as tightly, resting his cheek against her hair. And neither said "I love you," not yet. But the moment didn't need those words. The feeling was already there, growing quietly, confidently, beautifully. Their story didn't become perfect overnight. There were still challenges ahead. Adele's non-profit still needed sustainable funding. Stanley still had to manage burnout and knee recovery. They still had moments of insecurity, fatigue, and fear. But the difference now was simple and profound. They faced them, together. Adele, once afraid of losing everything, now had someone who stood beside her without taking over. Stanley, once afraid of opening up, now had someone who listened without judgment. Two imperfect people, one imperfect world. One extraordinary connection formed by an ordinary accident. Their lives hadn't collided violently. Their hearts had collided softly. And what grew from that collision was something neither expected, but both welcomed. The storm had been fierce, unpredictable, chaotic, disorienting. But in the weeks that followed, Nashville settled into spring, warm breezes rustling through, the budding trees, sunlight scattering across sidewalks where puddles had once pooled. One evening, Adele and Stanley walked through that same park, the one in the framed photo, hand in hand. The world around them was calm, quiet, peaceful. "Funny," Stanley said, kicking a pebble. "If someone told me a car crash would change my life, I'd have said they were crazy." "Same," Adele replied. "But I guess life likes surprises. Good ones, sometimes." Adele smiled softly. "Sometimes the best things come from the messiest moments." They stopped near the pond where sunlight shimmered off the water, the same spot captured in the frame he'd made. Adele leaned into him. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd gone home 5 minutes earlier? Or I'd left work 5 minutes later?" Stanley chuckled. "Probably nothing. We would have kept living our separate lives." Adele looked up at him with a knowing warmth. "And missing out?" He squeezed her hand gently. "Yeah." And missing out, they stood there quietly, breathing in the soft scent of blooming grass and listening to distant city sounds. It felt peaceful, like the beginning of something steady and certain. "So," Adele said lightly, "what now?" Stanley looked out over the water. "Now," he said softly, "we keep going, one step at a time, one day at a time, together." Adele nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder again. The storm that brought them together had long passed, but the connection it sparked had only grown stronger. Their story wasn't ending, it was beginning. A beginning rooted in kindness, vulnerability, and the unexpected nature of life. Because sometimes the night that shakes your world apart is the night that helps you put everything back together. Sometimes life doesn't change us gently. Sometimes it crashes into us, not with warnings, not with permission, but in moments we never plan for, moments that leave us shaken, scared, and wondering how everything went wrong so fast. And if this story connected with you, it's probably because, in some way, you've been there too. Maybe not in a storm like Stanley, maybe not in a moment of fear like Adele, but maybe in a season where you felt overwhelmed, where life felt heavy, where you were doing your best just to make it through the day. And here's the truth I want you to hold on to tonight. The hardest moments of your life are not always here to destroy you. Sometimes they're here to redirect you. Stanley didn't wake up that morning thinking his life was about to change. Adele didn't step into that storm knowing it would rewrite her future. They were just ordinary people, living ordinary lives, doing their best, carrying their own worries, their own pain, their own doubts. And yet, in the middle of chaos, in the middle of fear, connection happened, healing began. Not because everything suddenly became perfect, but because they chose to keep going, they chose to stop, to care, to show up. And that's what real growth looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not loud. It's not always visible. It's quiet decisions made every day. To get out of bed when you're tired. To keep believing when things don't make sense. To stay kind when life hasn't been kind to you. If you're watching this right now and you feel stuck, if you feel like life has knocked you down one too many times, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are becoming stronger, becoming wiser, becoming someone who understands depth, resilience, and compassion in a way only hard seasons can teach. Storms don't mean you're failing. They mean you're alive. They mean change is happening, even if you can't see it yet. So don't rush your healing. Don't compare your journey. And don't give up on yourself just because the road feels heavy right now. One day you'll look back and realize the moment you thought was the end was actually the beginning. If this story spoke to you, let me know in the comments. If you're still standing after everything life has thrown at you, I'm proud of you. And if you're new here, welcome. You belong here. Because on this road, we don't walk alone. Stay strong, stay kind, and never underestimate what one moment can change. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for more stories.